Hey everybody out in YouTube land, it's me, Logan Albright, here with another book review for your satisfaction. Today we're going to do an oldie but a goodie, so strap on your classics helmet and let's get going. Alright, the book I reviewed yesterday was in the 18th century. It was a Gothic novel called The Monk, and it got me thinking about older books and our preconceived notions about them. I think in the modern times we tend to think anything older than about the 19th century must be very stuffy, very hard to read, very formal, very humorless. We don't think of people having a lot of humor back in those days. We think of them all being like Shakespeare and Milton and these. I guess Shakespeare had a lot of humor, but we think of them as being very stuffed and dry. And if they had a wit, it was a dry wit. I want to prove that wrong today by talking about Gargantua and Pantagruel. It's kind of a reflection on there you can see it. Gargantua and Pantagruel by Francois Rabelais. Now, this is a series of books, and I actually haven't finished it, so I hope you'll forgive me. There's 5 different books in here, and the work is actually unfinished. But the first 2 are really the only 2 that are important. The rest is sort of repetition of the same thing. And the first 2 were the influential ones that made a big impact on the writers of the day. Francois Rabelais, as you may have guessed from his name, is a French writer, and he wrote in the early 16th century. So we're going way back here. We're going almost 500 years back for this book. Now, this book is very strange. It's very weird. It's not what you think of when you think of 500-year-old literature. And it's largely strange because it is very humorous, it's very funny, and it's very bawdy. Now, not far from having a dry wit, Rabelais thought the funniest thing in the world were bodily functions. He thought sex was very funny. He thought overeating and drinking, overindulgence of all kinds were very funny. So there's a ton of that in here. But it's kind of a mix of high culture, low culture. There's extreme erudition in this writing. He references everything from the Bible to Greek myths he uses dozens of different languages. And I kind of think of it as sort of a proto-James Joyce because it's very stream of consciousness. There's not really a plot to speak of. Really, it's about Gargantua. The first book is called Gargantua, and it's about a giant named Gargantua. And about his kingdom and what he does. He rules over it, the parties he has, the great deeds he does. It's sort of written like a Greek fable or a Greek myth. You know, it's little isolated stories about things that happened to Gargantua in his life, the remarkable events of his life told in a very humorous way, with a lot of drinking and ribald type of activities going on. A lot of debauchery. That's the word I'm looking for, debauchery. Pantagruel is his son, and the second book concerns his adventures, which are substantially similar to his father's adventures. We get a couple of things from this book. We get the word Gargantuan. You may have heard the word Gargantuan. It's a great word. It actually comes from the character Gargantua in this book. Bet you didn't know that, did you? You learned something new from watching my channel. That's why you should subscribe. The other thing that's interesting, I've mentioned Aleister Crowley on this channel before, and I'm somewhat of a fan of his, and he founded a religion, or a cult, if you want to call it that, called Thelema, and it actually comes from this book. Gargantua founds an abbey called Thelemae, and the motto of the abbey is, there's only one motto of the abbey, and it's do what thou will, and that's the same as the motto that Aleister Crowley lived by. So I don't think he ever admitted to being influenced by this book, but he definitely was. So that's another interesting tidbit. There's lots of Latin in here and Greek. This translation is pretty good, I have to say. This is not an easy work to translate. There's a lot of puns, tons of puns, lots of wordplay. And I haven't read other translations, so it's hard for me to compare. But what I've read says that other translations that came earlier tended to be a little bit stuffy, a little bit Victorian. They try to edit it out, some of the more bawdy jokes. This one sticks more true to it. The translator's name is Burton Raffel. I'm not familiar with him, but he does a great job translating these books into modern, contemporary, easy-to-read English, and he does a good job with footnotes and translations of the various other languages, but apart from French, that are used in this book, to help you kind of steer along and follow along some of the more obscure references that Rabelais makes, because he was very well read, he would reference everybody from who came before him. He came before Shakespeare, so he doesn't reference Shakespeare. But there's Chaucer, there's Homer, all the Greeks, all the Romans. There's everything written in Latin and Greek. I'm pretty sure he had read up to that point. So there's of course the Bible. There's snatches of Hebrew in here. There's snatches of Scots Gaelic. It's kind of amazing the amount of scholarship that went into this book, which is mainly just an excuse to tell ridiculous bodily function jokes. There's a lot of satire in it too, though. There's a lot of satirizing the nobility, the king and queen, the upper classes, as everyone liked to do in those days, make fun of the people in power as a way of taking the power away from them. So as I said, there's not, it's not very story driven. It's told as a series of anecdotes that are all humorous in their own right. But I think if you're interested in what people used to laugh at 500 years ago, the kind of humor they had, the kind of things they thought were funny, if you're interested in changing your opinion maybe that people were stuffy back then, that people were stuck up and we're much more free and loose now because we had the sexual revolution and all that. You think that's a modern day thing, this will change your mind. People have always been filthy and had their minds in the gutter, and in a pretty hilarious way. So, I don't think you need to read all of it. As I said, I haven't read all of it. I've only read the first 2.5 books of it, and then it starts to get a little bit repetitive. It's just too much material. But it is very influential. You'll hear references to it everywhere, and it's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in kind of where modern literature came from. And I really think it was influential on James Joyce. It feels very much similar to his style in terms of stream of consciousness and putting in all these obscure puns and references. It feels a lot like Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses in that regard. So that's my review for today. Gargantua and Pantagruel, Francois Rabelais. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've been Logan Albright. I'm glad that you're watching. I hope you will keep watching, and I hope you will subscribe and leave me comments and do all those nice things. Until next time, catch you later.